What is up, Facebook land? Welcome to another episode of the Two Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. And before I introduce my buddy, good friend of 20 years, Gary Byrne, I want to first dedicate the show as I always do. I'm going to do something that's a little bit different because I don't think I ever would have done this before, but I'm going to dedicate the show to whistleblowers. I worked for an agency prior to becoming a police officer in Collegeville, United States Federal Air Marshal Service. And there was a lot of issues within that agency. And I know that there were a few people that went to the government organization that you go to when you want to tell on other people for things that are happening. And they took a lot of heat and they lost their jobs and were pariahs for a very long time until they were vindicated and proven to be correct with what they were saying. And while I don't think that everybody needs to tell everything that's happening in the world, I'm coming from Army intelligence, I have secrets I'll take to the grave. But I do believe that when you work for an agency and there are things that are going wrong or things that are being done inappropriately or people are abusing their power, I think that it's your responsibility to make sure that you report that stuff. And for anybody that's ever taken the bold step to do that, my hat's off to you. And because that takes a level of courage and bravery and risk for not only you, but your family and those that love you, that I don't know if I could do. So that's what I'm dedicating the show today, to whistleblowers. Where can you find my podcast? My podcast can be found anywhere, pretty much: iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Castbox, Anchor, you name it. You can find the audio version of the podcast. All right, my man Gary. Let me give a little overview of Gary. So Gary and I met in 2002, early 2002, when we were federal agents with the United States Federal Air Marshal Service in the Philadelphia field office. Prior to that, and Gary, he worked from the Air Marshals until, I don't know, 2015, 16, I think. I don't know when the official date was, but I remember your retirement party in that area. Prior to that, he was a uniformed Secret Service officer. And for those that don't understand the difference between a Secret Service agent and the United States Secret Service officer, is officers are in the uniform division of the Secret Service. They do the physical security. They do they get sent out ahead of time and make sure that all the buildings are secure and the routes are secure and all that kind of stuff. And then they also do the interior security of the White House. And Gary was that for a very long time as well, over 30 years of federal service. He's best known today as the author of Crisis of Character, which was a book that was released in 2016 during the election for the presidency, detailing his time as a uniformed Secret Service agent in the Clinton White House, guarding the Oval Office door, and his involvement in the Lewinsky scandal. So that's what he's known most for, but he's also a very good man, a Pennsylvania, Delaware County resident, born and bred. He is a good friend of mine, somebody I trust, somebody that I would trust with my secrets, and someone that I know has already had my back in the past. So without further ado, my good friend, Gary Byrne.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you. Or good evening. Good to see everybody. Thanks, Matt. I'm grateful to be here. I just, as you were talking, I just, I thought back to 15, 16 years ago. We met in 2003.
2003, right.
I was just thinking that, like, if anybody told us we'd be doing this someday, we'd have let, first of all, we would have said, what's a podcast? But,
Right.
So thank you so much for having me on. I'm grateful to be here, and take it away.
So we've known each other a long time. We have plenty of stories that we can tell for hours over beers at a bar. But I think the one that I want to know first, because I know your home life, I know your situation, but I don't think anybody else really knows who you are as a man. And I asked the same question to everybody. I just changed the name, obviously, so I'm not going to ask you who's Jillian Mealy because you're not her. So I will say, who is Gary Byrne?
Yeah, Gary Byrne's a guy who was born in Ridley Park, Pennsylvania, in Delaware County. He's a guy that has severe ADD and dyslexia, so bad that when I was a child, I thought it was insurmountable. And then as I got older, I just learned to work around it. It'd be the best way I can say to for people to understand is, just picture, like, if you only had, 3 fingers on each hand, you learn to adapt, and And so I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my life. I knew like college was not going to be for me. I figured that out pretty early on, just because of the, and times are different today with when you have dyslexia and ADD, and they have all this training and classes and all kinds of stuff to help you. Back in the, I was born in 62. And so back in the late 60s, early 70s, there was no such thing. But I've met a lot of people, Matt, that were good people who, kind of steered me in the right direction. And some of the adult, not just my family unit, but some of the other adults in my life were instrumental in me being here today. Just good people who liked me and were kind to me. And, I graduated from high school. If you ask me today, like we're talking, I'll tell you I was a social promotion from high school. I mean, it's not that I didn't try. It was like banging my head against the wall. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, it wasn't all. I can't blame it all on that. After a while, I think I liked being the class clown a little bit, so I kind of hid behind that. But I went in the Air Force, and that was a huge, huge rudder in my life. I applied to go in the U.S. Air Force Security Police, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. I was there 4 years. When I got out, I worked at Boeing Aircraft right here in Delaware County for a couple of years. And then my girlfriend, who's now been my wife for almost 30 years, found this thing in the paper about the Secret Service Uniform Division. And when I first got out of the Air Force, I had looked into the Secret Service, but the people I talked to were agents. And at the time, I mean, the Secret Service will always have a wedge between the agent side and the Uniform Division side. But at this time, it was exaggerated, and they didn't even mention that there was a Uniform Division. So anyway, years later, we see this advertisement. So I fill out the paperwork, and 2.5 years later, they swore me in. And I was almost instantly working at the White House after training, and I loved it. I loved everything about it. It was high paced. It was exciting. We've talked about things before. You get to see exciting things and just everyday things, and you find out that these people that we elect are just like we are. In some cases, they're not even as decent as we are. But to each his own. And the Secret Service had a motto, kind of an unofficial motto: the American people will elect them, and the Secret Service protects them. And I took that to heart. And I also, like you clearly, and I didn't realize this until years later when I first started thinking about writing the first book, that like you don't realize that you're not only you drinking the Kool-Aid, but you're mixing it, and and you believe it, but I love the job, and the people I worked with, just like you and I were talking about, how much we enjoy. Our work is frustrating, but we liked each other. We liked the people we worked with. We appreciated they made the sacrifices that we did. That's what bonds us together. And then the other men and women do the same thing. And these people in the Uniform Division, they were special. And I burned some bridges when I wrote the book. But I also, a lot of people stood up and stood up for me and understood. And that's really who I am. I'm a simple guy. I mentioned this to you earlier, and I'll say it again to your audience. I'm a guy who sailed under a magic star. I'm not sure when I did, but I do know that I've had some incredible luck in life, and I'm grateful for it. I've been humbled by all of it. The success of the books, the fact that I made it to retirement is a big deal, as you know, and I'm grateful for it all. I got a great family, wife, 2 kids. We have a cat, not a dog, but so
I'm not going to judge you for that.
What's that?
I'm not going to judge you for being a cat guy, but whatever.
Yeah, I wasn't originally, but we ended up with a cat. Now I have to be a cat guy. So, that's who I am. I'm definitely a guy who's originally black and white as far as right and wrong. The law, the rules are here. Not following me is not acceptable. My dad was like that. We were raised like that. Now, I will tell you, as I've gotten older, I realized there's outstanding circumstances. And it was one of the things that my biggest surprise in law enforcement, Matt, was that, I joined law enforcement because I wanted to do good and help people. but I did not realize how much we could help people with just a little bit of kindness at times. Because, as you know, and you know better than I do because you're that normal street cop guy, where I was more of, at the White House, law enforcement, and then as an air marshal. But we run into most of the people we know from our work at their worst times in life. And, the rules are the rules, but, there's always the opportunity to do a kindness or whatever. And so when I learned that, and I learned it when I was in the Air Force, when I was really young, and I think that's one of the things that always comes back. It's a theme in my life, Yes, this is what they did. Yes, you should do this, but you know what? Is there a better way to do it that still fits inside the parameters? And so that was always kind of a driving force for me. So
one of the things that you said that I think really resonates, and that there's an overall theme here, is that you believed in something greater than you. You believed in truth, justice, the American way. You believed in your country. You believed in the rule of democracy. You believed in the Republic of the United States of America, and the functionality of the different aspects of it, whether as a uniformed officer working inside the White House, or as a federal agent, or as a Secret Service Air Force security police officer. You've served in many different capacities.
Yeah.
And the thing that I want people to first know about you, before we get in any of the details of the most inquiring minds want to know the most about, is that you're a patriot.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I think that people that I hang my hat on, that I vouch for, that I go to bat for, have to meet a certain, I don't care what your political background is. I don't care black, white, blue, green. I don't care if you're rich or poor. But if you are, first and foremost, a good person who believes in his country and the greatness that is America, if you believe in your family, and we were talking before we went live about how you are caring for your mom who has dementia, and you and your siblings are, and that's your full-time job right now, is taking care of your mom. And to me, that warms my heart, because you have options.
Right.
You're a New York Times bestselling author. You have people that would like you to come do X, Y, and Z, but you've chosen to be a son. And I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah.
And then finally, you mentioned it just in passing, but it means a lot when your girlfriend, who is now your wife of 30 years.
Yeah.
It takes special chemistry, having been with my wife now together for 24 years, almost 25. The reality is that our jobs are not necessarily marriage. They're not good for marital bliss.
No, they're not.
And it takes both a patient and understanding wife, and then a patient and understanding us, to understand that if they are having a really shitty day and are not happy with us,
right,
that there's reason. And we probably caused most of it by not being there on holidays, or having to go on a deployment, or being on an international mission for the Air Marshals. All those things add up to the difficultness of being married for 30 years. And the fact that you still are, as now that you're semi-retired, it's a testament to who you are as a person, and your wife, and how she's been committed to you. Yeah,
it's a big testament to Jenny, for sure. And I don't want to, as I mentioned to you earlier, you're steering the ship, but, one of the toughest things I had to do, all the things we've been through, was when the idea of writing the first book came up, it was to try to float it past her. And I really, I was so concerned about her reaction, because there were tough times on her, but she surprised me again. And, we can get into that later, but yeah, she's always been a good sport. It hasn't been easy on her. My mom kind of gave me some good advice 30 some years ago. She goes, when Jenny and I got engaged, she says, understand something about marriage. People will tell you it's 50-50. She said, that's not true. She goes, some days it's 10-90. And you need to remember that. And, there's a reason. And actually, a good buddy of mine said this to me one time too, was there's a reason that priest stands up on the altar, or that judge utters the words, for better or for worse. So you better understand what they're talking about. And
that didn't just come out of nowhere.
right. So I'm preaching to the choir for a lot of people, but I keep that in the front of my mind, and I will tell you, I make a concerted effort as time goes by to, if I realize there's something like that I said or did years ago, even with the kids, because we were under a lot of stress when we were, flying as an air marshal, you're fatigued, you're jet lagged. I try to remind myself to maybe go back and talk about something I did or said. And so, but yeah, it's been a ride, and I'm grateful for it. And it never, ever none of it would have happened without Jenny. So
let's start. I think the best way to start this next section is to find out, before we go back in time to the time when you were in the White House.
Right.
Let's talk about why you wrote the book. Let's talk about because it is, if you think about it, if you're running for, say you're running for elected office, say
right.
you're running for senator, that affects, you may be doing it for altruistic reasons. You may want to be someone who's a change maker and do all that stuff, but there's a lot of ancillary people around you that are going to get affected by your choices.
Yes.
And being in the public eye and doing something that is not only going to be very public, but also very public at a time when there's an election for president, and you're telling secrets per se, you're telling inside information from a time period when you were employed by the federal government. So there's it's a shitstorm.
It was.
For not only for you to make that decision, but for your family and for them to be on board with it. So let's go to the time when you said, okay, I have a story to tell and I want to tell it.
Can I back up a little before that? Your
show, bro.
So I have these good friends. I actually met them at the White House 20 years ago or more. We hunt together. We recreation together. We shoot together. They have property up in Potter County. Anyway, they came to me in about 2014, I think. And they have a son, Grant, who's my co-writer. And he said, hey, we want you to write your life story. We got this great idea. They're all excited. We want you to write your life story, and we want you to help Grant do it for you. He needs a new project, blah, blah, blah. And, I kind of laughed, and I said, you don't understand what you're talking about. And they said, no, it'll be great, blah, 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 And I said, no, you don't understand. I said, it from one perspective. I said, that time, I said, you're clearly talking about, the president's impeachment scandal and Monica Lewinsky. But although, to be completely honest, it wasn't just what they were focused on. You worked enough. We knew each other well enough. I have some really funny stories that really don't have anything to do with politics. But anyway, so they're very strong-willed people. And so I let them have their say. And when they were done, I said, here's what I'll do. I'll give you 4 months. I'm going to work on this with Grant. I'll give him a writing sample. I will dictate to him. I will edit everything. I said, but there's a couple things you got to understand. They say it's never going to happen. You don't understand what you're asking. So in that 4 month time period, I want you to look into what it is you're asking me. Do a little research. And I said, and understand this. If it was to go forward, I'm not spending a dime of money I have. And they were like, well, we'll spend. I said, we're talking about a lot of money here. I said, off the top of my head, we'll probably have to spend $20,000 in lawyers before we even decide we can't do it. And they didn't blink an eye. So anyway, in about 2.5 months, we had 3 working chapters and a forward. And Matt, I had completely flipped the other way. It was almost like a bolt of lightning hit me. I was flying back from Munich one night. And I've been very careful. There's a couple things, too, I want to make very clear. I had decided before I decided to do it, I wasn't going to tell anybody. I wanted everybody that we knew, you included, everybody we ever worked with, everybody I ever worked with, my family. I want everybody to have real deniability. Not plausible deniability, but they knew nothing. And because I knew how vindictive these people were, I knew how vindictive the government is. I had the Secret Service, the Homeland Security, the Air Marshals, and I thought it was very, I wanted to protect everybody else. And I knew I was going to ruffle some feathers, but I wasn't going to, and I was very careful never to out anybody unnecessarily. There were already public figures They had already been, because of the scandal, So after the 2.5 months, like I said, I had these 3 working chapters and a forward, and I completely flipped the other way. I'm flying back from Germany one night, and I had printed up the material that Grant had given me. I was usually looking at it electronically. I never looked at it on the airplane because I didn't want anybody looking over my shoulder, So anyway, but this flight on the way back, I was, the seat I was sitting in, I forget what was going on, but like I was up against the rear bulkhead, so you really couldn't come up against me behind me. So I was looking at it and I was making some notes, and then I decided to just read it again. And after I read it, I thought to myself, somebody needs to tell the truth about what really happened. Everybody thinks they know what happened, but there's a backstory behind the backstory. The Secret Service was doing things. We were doing things. People were, everybody was, nobody, you couldn't jump off the ship like the proverbial rats off a sinking ship, but everybody was running for cover as much as they could. And so I wanted to tell the real story. And I thought, who has a better opportunity to tell it than me? I'm at the end of my career. I knew I'd have to retire. Like, this is all coming as I'm sitting on this plane in the dark, as you did many a times. All this is coming to me like so fast. I'm making notes, and I'm like, I'll have to retire. Writing the book is pushing the envelope far enough. I don't want to, I was pretty sure I would lose my pension. Honestly, I did. And so when I got back, I gave Jenny the material, and she read it, and she immediately said, I see your problem. You have to do this. And when she said it, I almost fell over. Like, I thought she was pulling my chain at first, and I didn't say anything. And then I just let her talk, and she talked it out. And I'm like, that's exactly the way I feel about it. I said, you do realize we could lose our pension. And she said, well, you have to do this. And I'm like, all right, well, let me get back to the Schmitz. And so anyway, we, next thing you know, we went forward, and I talked to them, and I said, listen, I talked about the money. They were on board. And next thing you know, we were halfway through writing the book. We had an agent, Javelin, from down in Virginia. And then they had 5 different publishers that were interested in the book. We went with the largest one, Hachette. Their subsidiary is Center Street. They offered us money up front, but they're not the reason I went with them. The reason I went with them, because when we first had a phone interview with everybody, they were hammering the crap out of me. Why would anybody want to hear that again? Everybody knows that story. Blah, 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 blah. And I just kept sticking to my guns and kept making my points. And finally, I got a little frustrated, and I said, listen, nobody else is in a position to tell this story that was standing in the background watching it and took a polygraph test to get there. And I said, listen, people are going to call me a liar, but it'll be the first time ever. And I said, the more you learn about me, you'll understand that. So we went forward. I was great, like you mentioned before, I was greatly concerned about being called, a rat or a whistleblower. And I don't really see at the time, if I'd come forward on my own, I would have said I was a whistleblower. Now I'm just a guy telling his life story. And is it salacious? Yes. But nothing that I ever talked about was classified material. And like I was telling you earlier, that there was a story that I told Grant when we first started, everything has to be true. And never, ever can we stray from that. And we're never going to hang anybody out to dry unnecessarily. There's a lot of people that work for the Clintons and for Al Gore that were jackasses. But that's 20 years ago. I do not need to be, to have the scorched earth policy. I wanted to tell the story. Everything's true. Are there parts of certain stories I left out people's names and rounded it out a little bit just so I didn't implicate them? Absolutely. And it's always, to me, it's always the right thing to do the right thing. So again, if you're already a public figure, I talked about you if I needed to. As far as soul searching, absolutely. And I'll tell you this, your audience, and you this, a day doesn't go by that I don't think about. I'll never be completely comfortable with releasing the first book, never. But I thought it was the right thing to do. My thing is vote for whoever you want, not my business. I'm a big believer in our Constitution. I I mean, you know how many people, I mean, I don't have to tell you or most of your audience, millions of people have died trying to get the right to vote. And think of how many we've died in this country getting it and keeping it what we have. And so it was not lost on me. So I thought it all revolves around the truth. Constitution revolves around the truth, doing the right thing, being truthful. So if anybody could tell this story, it was me. So I did. I jumped into it with both feet. And I will tell you, there were a couple days when I started remembering stuff, and I thought, oh my God, I've bitten off more than I could chew. But we went forward with it, and it worked out. So,
all right. So, number one, I think it takes courage to tell that story. When you told that story, for many reasons, not the least of which is that we live in a world and a time where 98% of our information and our knowledge is given to us from the media.
Yeah.
Very few people have lived in the world which we are now voting people into. We don't have, the inside access information. We're relying on what we believe to be the source of factual information that's given to us through a television or a computer or a newspaper or a podcast. And I think that there's nothing you can do to change that. That there isn't a way to change that process. So while the Clinton scandal wasn't new news,
right,
the authenticity of your story as to what actually happened and what the people and the players were like when it actually happened was information that was never made public in a way that was from a non-media, non-partisan, non-paid, influenced political way. You told a story based on your information that you saw from an opinion of two eyes that witnessed it.
Right.
I think it was important at that time, whether or not it influenced an election or not, I do not know, but I can tell you that it at least gave everybody the landscape and said, okay, if we're going to, Trump's lived in a public life his whole life.
Right.
Never been one to sugarcoat anything or to hide his opinions or feelings. So it's not, do I think there's stuff that Trump's done that nobody knows about? I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a closet of skeletons.
Sure.
But I think that most of his closet's wide open.
It is.
And I think he takes some pride in his crappy closet sometimes. So I think with the Clintons, though, there was this mystique, this protected aura around them. And I think what you did was you took a little bit of that aura and you made it a little more clear.
Yeah.
By saying, okay, if we're going to vote for somebody to run the free world, and this is who I know them to be during my experience, physical, personal experience with them, I think it was very important for that story to be told. So I want to thank you for telling it because I wouldn't have the balls. I mean, I had to leave the Air Marshals when I wrote my book, not because I wrote anything about the Air Marshals, because I didn't ask for their permission.
Right.
I was already on the way out when I decided to publish my book. So I already knew that without their permission, I was going to get my pee-pee smacked. Right. So I wrote it anyways, and I left knowing I was leaving, and I published it at a certain time when I did. You did it knowing you were going to leave as well, but you did it at a time when it couldn't have been any more magnified.
Right.
The microscope that was on top of you couldn't have been any bigger.
Right.
Was when that book came out.
Yeah, no, you're right. And the truth is, when we were first talking about doing it, I mean, I knew there was an election coming. Come on, I'm very political because of the job I had, but that wasn't my thing. Like, I made it very clear to the publisher and to my agent, and I said it publicly. When I say publicly, to the phone conferences we had before we started signing contracts, I will never, ever, no matter what the timeline is, everything has to be just right. We have to make sure we don't accidentally harm somebody unnecessarily, mistakenly leave a name in there or something. Because when I write everything in there, and then I go back and I take it out. And I know that sounds cumbersome, but it's hard to edit as you're speaking. And I did a lot of recording, and Grant did most of the writing, and I edited it in such a way that until I was happy with the polish, that as much as I could do, that I released it to Grant, so to speak. But the thing is like it became clear to me, not right away, but as the process went on, it became clear to me that the worst they could do is call me a liar. And the funny thing is I was called a liar when it first started. I mean, during the scandal, just to give your audience an idea how crazy it got, the Secret Service was trying to keep us from testifying, which we were fine with. Nobody wanted to talk about Bill Clinton's life. But they were also trying to keep the executives in the Secret Service from testifying because they knew that Judge Starr knew that they knew the truth. They could have just subpoenaed the director of the Secret Service, and he could have, under oath, told them what they wanted to know. But to save their careers, they pushed us forward. About 24 uniform division officers, a few junior agents, and one senior agent that wasn't even there at the time. So we saw this, and but what are you going to do? Well, we called them out on it, and the way they put their foot down made it very clear. You can either row the boat with us, or we'll throw your backside over the edge. Another first thing I want your audience to understand is to understand how the politics and certainly Clinton politics worked. During the beginning of deposing us, finding out what it is we knew, the original lawyers and even the Secret Service lawyers had no idea what the uniform division guys actually did, especially in the West Wing. And it got to the point where it was almost comical. And what I mean by that is all of a sudden one day, we weren't supposed to talk to each other. But one day I get home from work and my wife says, "Officer, your buddy called." So I said, "Okay." And she said, "You guys aren't supposed to talk to each other." And I'm like, "You know what? If he called, there's a reason. And I'm not leaving him hanging." I said, "I will write it down and I will tell them," like we said, So I called the guy back and he said, "Be careful when you go in tomorrow." And I'm like, "What's up?" He goes, "They're trying to make it look like you were having the affair with Monica Lewinsky." Now, did you see the look you just gave yourself?
Listen, not saying you couldn't have nagged that, but honestly.
No, but that's what they were going to, that's how crazy it got. So I come in the next day and buddy, we're still meeting in the Secret Service legal counsel's office in the old building. And, one side is me and the Secret Service lawyers. And then the other side is the Justice Department lawyers that are supposedly helping us, not Ken Starr's lawyers. Keeping in mind, there was no attorney-client privilege because we're all government employees. They all eat at the same steakhouse and drink out of the same trough. And so anyway, they start on me and they're like, "So tell us about your relationship with Monica Lewinsky." I'm like, "I've already told you, there was no relationship. I threw her out on these dates. I had it written down. I went to the chief of staff, deputy chief of staff, asked them to remove her." No, well, did you ever meet with her did you ever have lunch with her? Did she ever give you anything? I said, "Nothing. I told you in the very beginning in my statement, read my statement again." That's what I said. And I gave them a printed statement that said that because the first thing they did, in the 6 subpoenas they gave me, the first one I got was for any gifts that I had received from Lewinsky or anybody on the staff. And Monica did send me a Christmas card one year in her effort to try to, get me over to her side and kind of placate me and keep me from throwing her out. But, when the card came, my wife goes, "Is this from that crazy girl in the West Wing?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And I read it and I said, "Here, throw it out." And that was it. So, they really did try to, we got to the point where when it was obvious to everybody what they were doing, that I made it very clear that, and this happened 2 or 3 times. I think 3 times where I got so aggravated, and I was afraid, but I got so angry that I said, "You know what?" I literally took my ID out and I put it on the table and I said, "No problem. I'm done. I will go call 2020 and I will spill the beans on everybody." I said, "I will burn the Secret Service to the ground. I will burn this investigation to the ground. I'm done." And they're like, No. I'm like, "You are implying that I'm having an affair with her. You're trying to steer it that way." No. I'm like, Bullshit. So later on, when we took a break that particular day, I went outside with the Secret Service lawyers, and I looked at him and I said, "Tell me I'm wrong." He goes, "I don't know what to say." He goes, "Honest to God, we knew nothing about it." I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to say bullshit, but you know." So anyway, that's just one example of one of the crazy things that happened. So
that's insane, first of all, but
yeah.
but not surprising. I mean,
Right.
I don't think any White House is free from its internal infighting and politics and setting people up and promoting people and hurting people. I just think that's the nature of politics at that level. I just think it's I'll tell a quick story. Friend of mine who was a U.S. Representative for 2 years. I thought he would be a great U.S. representative, and he didn't run again after his 2-year period. And I asked him, why on God's name would you give up that job? I mean, you're making $175,000 a year. You're going to pay for life. Like, you're good. And he said, I couldn't wake up another day and face that cesspool of vipers.
Yes. Go
home to my wife and kids and look him in the eye and say that I'm doing a good deed for my country, because nothing was getting done. And that was somebody who wasn't involved in anything, that he was just a guy that ran and got elected. And it was just very disheartening to hear. But that's 20 years after what you're talking about. So it's insane.
So the one thing that I want to make clear is one of the reasons I told you that part of it is because I want you to understand that's the way the Clintons work. The first thing they want to do is first they deny it. It wasn't true. It was the right-wing conspiracy made this whole thing up. And we knew it was true. Listen, if you told me that was the thing that was going to take down Bill Clinton, having an affair with a woman, I'd have laughed in your face. I'm like, with all the other crap going on, listen, this is modus operandi. Everything we ever heard about these guys from Arkansas, whether it was in a tabloid or reported news story in a regular news, CBS or whatever, it all came true. They brought the Arkansas circus to Washington, and it was all true. And that's one of the reasons, the kind of behind the scenes motivation to write the book was I wanted to get the facts out. But like behind the scenes, first they deny it, and then when they're having hard trouble denying it, and then there's other links. I mean, this is before the blue dress came up, and but there were other things leading people to believe that it might be true, and so we can't have him go down for this. So there's other people that work there. Let's pick one of the officers. This guy combated her all the time. Let's flip it the other way. And that's what they always try to do. It's not that I did it. Okay, now you caught me doing it. Okay, but everybody does it. Right. Look how they when they found out he dodged the draft in Vietnam. Look how they did that. And I never really understood it that clearly. And this is the funny thing: the people that helped defend Clinton at the time, like George Stephanopoulos and Dee Dee Myers, when I read their books and research of my book, they helped me make my point. I mean, because they were in a couple places, they were brutally honest about their relationships and the way the Clintons behaved, and they just backed me up without even knowing it, So anyway, so that was what they tried to. That was one of the things they tried to do, and it wasn't just me. They when it didn't work with me, they tried to accuse. Basically, in hindsight, Matt, I think they were fishing for somebody to say, you know what? If you want me to, I'll say it was me. And then. Right. But I want X, Y, and Z or whatever. But
they want somebody to lay on the sword.
Yeah, no, right. And that term, that's funny you should say that. That term was said to me many a times by many attorneys who were looking out for me, and not just my buddy Mark H, who helped me out a lot. One of the other Secret Service agents that was involved, his lawyer Larry Cockle, John Muscat's father. John Muscat was another UD officer who I talk about in the book. We had conflicting stories. John had a memory of something that happened. My memory was different. Was the same incident. Our memories were different, and they tried to. That's the second or third thing they tried to do was pit us against each other. Musket says you're lying. And then they went to Musket and said, Byrne says you're lying. And we never said that. What I said was, this is what I remember. And I knew what they were trying to do. By this time, I mean, it took me all 15 minutes to realize that these people were going to do everything they could to come out on top of this. These lawyers protecting Clinton. I mean, they were, like I said, they were all eating at the same steakhouse. So it was crazy.
Now, you passed a polygraph, right? During that time when you were giving your testimony.
No, they didn't have polygraphs. So
did you ever get a polygraph?
Yeah, for hiring.
Yeah.
To hire you, they give you a polygraph. Now, it's funny because that came up. Good. That's an excellent point to make. That came up. And it came up in one of the original meetings where all the officers, most of the officers involved, were all sitting at the same table. And I'm telling you, those lawyers didn't have a clue of what the Pandora's box they opened up. Because they were the first couple of meetings we all met together. And I realized their plan was to meet with us a couple times together to feel us out and then start separating us. And that's what they did. But they had no idea of the mistake they were making, because when you put a bunch of us in the room together, and regardless of whatever else is going on in our lives, we're still cops and we watch each other's backs. And when they brought that up about the, I'm sorry, what was the point I was making about the
polygraph?
Yeah, polygraphing again. And one of the guys goes, no problem. As soon as the director takes one and you take one and Bill Clinton takes one, then we'll do it. And I'm like, exactly. Yeah. And the lawyer's like, why would we take one? And John Musket goes, because the first question I'm going to ask you is, who are you really working for? What's your job here? Because I don't believe it. And I didn't realize how important that was until later on, as I'm writing the second book. After the first book comes out, I'm writing the second book, Secrets of the Secret Service. I contact one of the guys who retired. He contacted me. He was very excited about the book. He was one of the pivotal people with me. He's public knowledge. His name's Brett Chinnery. His testimony is on YouTube too. Anyway, he reminded me of some of the dirty things they were trying to do behind our backs and set us off balance, or again, like the accusation that one of us was actually having the affair with her. Now, here's another truth. I didn't talk about this before, but I'm fine with talking with it now because some things have changed. But there were people in the Secret Service that were actually having an affair with Monica at the same time, according to them. Now, she never said this to me, but they did. And based on what I saw her do, I believe she was manipulating them to get closer to Bill Clinton. So let's
talk about that. Let's talk about the access point. So you were stationed at the White House door, right? At the Oval Office door, right?
Yeah. So
she was constantly. She was a staffer, right? She was a low-level staffer.
She was an intern. She was an unpaid intern. Okay.
So let's talk about that. Set up that scenario.
This is another thing I want people to understand. Is Monica Lewinsky a victim? She is a little bit. Bill Clinton was 49 years old. She was 22 or 23. She was only a few years older than their daughter, Chelsea. But she's more importantly that she's a victim. I want you to understand this. And this is from the guy, and I'll make this as clear as I can to make it, just so you realize I'm not just an angry old jackass, is she's a victim of her own doings. She did everything she could to manipulate the Secret Service security system she befriended Betty Carey. She befriended 3 or 4 uniform division people that worked in the West Wing. She was bringing in cupcakes and cookies, and she was trying to bribe people and soften them up. She tried to do everything. I was immune to that. Just because I'm, Matt, you couldn't, if you put 50 people that we worked together in the Air Marshals, you guys would laugh yourselves to death trying to figure out how big the stick was up my butt. I was all about the rules. Now and I've loosened up a little bit over the years, and I even loosened up a little bit in the Air Marshals. But I always felt like if it came from you started with exactly what was supposed to be done and happen, then you could work from there, as opposed to I raised my kids under the philosophy of whatever they ask me for, I say no at first. Because from no, I can back up and say yes. But if you say yes and then you find out that, down the road that this might not be a good idea, it's hard to back up. So it was always by the rules and always no first. When Lewinsky was trying to get in, I saw her right off the bat. She was an intern. One of the things that people learned right away when they first get into the White House is you can't get over the West Wing without having a certain pass. And they trade the ideal. I'm telling you, I mean, clearly she was willing to give away or sell, however you want to look at it, use her body to get what you want. I mean, she literally was. So it first starts out like I come to work one day, and the post was called E6. It was right outside the Oval Office. There was about 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, probably about 9 people that rotated through there. I was the post owner. I was E6A, and everybody else was B. And so, like my shift, it was me and one other guy. It was my post. He basically was my partner, and I run as you can imagine, it was a pretty tight ship. I followed the rules. Whenever somebody questioned me, the Secret Service had this green binder. I call it the green monster. I mentioned it in the books. It was about this thick with all the rules and regulations, whether it came from the national security rules based on congressional law, and I could cite it word and verse. So Lewinsky, I hear that she's trying to manipulate her way in there. I run into her. I throw her out. She comes back a second time that day. I take her pass. I call the sergeant. They walk her out. They take the pass. They walk her back over to her boss. The boss comes over and says, I don't understand what the problem is with my employee. I said, well, she's not supposed to be over here. She said, well, we had the Secret Service change the rules that you're allowed to let in an intern if they're doing work for me. And I said, well, what work was she doing for you? He goes, well, I forget what I sent her over here for. I said, well, the first time she said she was looking for the bathroom. There's 100 bathrooms over in the old executive office building. So that died. And I said, and the second thing, so eventually this guy realized that he was getting himself in a jam. So they did go back to the Secret Service. They actually asked them, and again, this is another example of the Clinton administration breaking down the security at the White House. I'm trying to think of the name of the book, Unlimited Access, written by a retired FBI agent. He wrote it at the time, Unlimited Access. His name will come to me. He breaks it down really good what they did because they started doing it to him first. He was the FBI representative at the White House. But anyway, so I keep throwing her out. Some of the other people that worked there were doing the same thing, and then some weren't. And some of the agents were like, well, what do you care if she's in here? I'm like, doesn't have the right pair. She's got no clearance whatsoever. She's an intern. So eventually, and I was trying to deny the ideal that the rumors about his relationship with her were true, because in my mind, I knew what else was going on out on the road, and the agents were always saying, you don't know what goes on out on the road. And I'm thinking, how much time and energy does this friggin' guy have? So, but eventually something happened that clued me in that it was true. It was all true, and it was even worse than we thought. And but she broke down, like I said, she manipulated everybody. She would go up to officers and start talking to them. And she actually offered my partner, and he was a nice guy, but he was a little gullible. I come up one day and I'm like, what's up? He goes, oh, I'm going down to the beach this weekend. I'm like, oh yeah. That's because he was kind of a stay-at-home guy. He was single, took care of his parents. I'm like, he goes, yeah, Lewinsky's got a beach house. And I'm like, no, yeah, stop, time out. I'm like, dude, you can't do that. You're going to shoot yourself in the foot here. You don't feed the animals, Right. So I don't know if they ever won or not. I don't think he actually did. I think he backed off for some reason. But anyway, so that's just the way she was manipulating everything. And she was lying to her boss. She was, she befriended Betty Carey. And Betty was a very nice lady. And I can't call her gullible because that's not fair. Betty is just a good, decent human being that I mean, literally to tell you that 5 minutes after I met Betty Carey that she loved me, I'm telling you, it's probably the truth. That's just the way she was. She could cite the entire King James Bible to you. She was very religious, and she was very humble and kind, and to a fault. And she was Monica's friend. I mean, I'm not telling you Lewinsky manipulated her and that was it. They were friends. And she tried to do the same thing to Debbie Schiff and some of the other officers. Debbie Schiff was the West Wing receptionist. And so Monica did everything she could to put herself in Bill Clinton's path. And two more things I want to mention about her. The last time I threw her out before I had her removed, and that only lasted a week, and I'll tell you that. But I said to her, "Look, I'm tired of doing this." And I called the sergeant. He came up and took my post, and I walked her off out of the West Wing, and I took her West Wing pass and said, "You tell your boss to come get it from me." And I went back downstairs. I typed up a memo. And I gave it to the watch commander or my sergeant, and that was it. And I figured, that would do something, but it didn't, and it kept happening. What she said to me was, she goes, "I'm not used to hearing the word no." And I said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "Nobody ever stops me from doing anything I want." And by this time, I had learned a little bit about her. She was literally raised in Beverly Hills, California. Honest to God. Her dad was a doctor. I mean, they were really pretty wealthy people. Doctor anywhere, but doctor in California. They were living the high life, and she was not used to hearing no. And she did. We learned after this. And by some of her own words that it was not the first time she had dated a married man, and she was very manipulative. Her friends talked about that. But anyway, so she tells me she's not used to hearing the word no. And then another. She came over one time, sometime during those years, and she had befriended. This is one of the more important people she befriended. She befriended the Navy steward that took care of the president during the day. His name was Nelvis, and Nell was a Filipino American, and a great history there. But I won't go into all that. But she befriended Nell. So her and Nell are talking one day, and as I walk up, this is before she gets her. Well, it doesn't matter when it was. But anyway, as I walk up, she's standing there and she sees me. As soon as she sees me, she starts walking away because she knows I'm going to throw her out or give her crap. And she turns to me, she tries to say, I'm just talking to Nelvis. And so I just stand there, I'm about 6 feet away. And I hear Nelvis is behind a door that opens into the hallway. And I hear Nelvis say to her, "If you're not careful, you're going to end up like Paula Jones." And now, of course, we already know who Paula Jones is now. She's suing Bill Clinton because she says he exposed herself. She says to him, "I'm much smarter than her." And as soon as she said that, something clicked in my head, and I'm like, someday down the road, that's going to come back and haunt the shit out of us. And it was like a premonition. So that's who she really is. I mean, do I feel bad for her? I do. But when you hear her today trying to spin herself as a victim, she's a victim of her own arrogance and her own stupidity. She got what she wanted. She got as close as she could to Bill Clinton, and she's the brunt of every joke that's ever told about sex. I mean,
that is true.
Yeah, she tells a story that during the scandal, like during the impeachment, Lewinsky tells a story that she was watching TV and Dr. Joyce Brother was on there. And Dr. Joyce Brother says, it just surprised me, but it's true. I looked it up. She says, "Who would want to take Monica home to their mother? Hey, Mom, this is Monica Lewinsky." And Monica states that when that happened, any strength she had left her body. That was the closest she ever was to taking her own life. And she talked about that. I'm glad she didn't. But again, she's a victim of her own behavior.
All right, we got about 7 minutes left in the podcast. I want to get No, dude, we could do a 3-hour podcast. Unfortunately,
yeah.
The syndicated show that I put this on later has an hour parameter.
I will come back anytime you want.
Oh, well, I'm sure there's going to be a part 2 to this.
Good.
One thing I want to make sure we touch on is that you were forced to testify against Bill Clinton.
Right.
You testified under oath.
Right.
In his impeachment process, correct?
Right.
Impeachment hearings?
Yeah, we were subpoenaed 6 times. We did everything we could to stay away from it. We let the Secret Service run what they did. I actually secretly had a lawyer There was no legal requirement for me to tell anybody from the government that I had another lawyer looking, kind of backstopping me. He was a friend, and he actually started his career as a lawyer in the CIA, so I had the perfect guy. And anyway, yeah, I tried to do everything I could to resist, even to the point where at some point I will tell you, as much as I resisted it at the beginning, because everybody kept saying to me, all you have to say is, and I say everybody, certain Secret Service agents were saying, if you don't remember, you don't remember. And I'm like, dude, I'm not wired like that. I'm the worst poker player ever. I mean, I don't play poker because I suck at lying and bluffing. And so anyway, I wanted nothing to do with it. It went through 6 subpoenas and went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Secret Service even tried to invent something called the protective function privilege, similar to a spousal privilege. Mm-hmm. You know, your spouse can't be forced to testify against you because of the proximity we have to have to the protectee, and truly because of the time we spend with them. But it failed. And when the Supreme Court Justice Rehnquist ruled that there was no standing in the protective function privilege, and Judge Starr's investigation made it clear that the first person they wanted was Byrne, was me, Gary Byrne. Judge Rehnquist said Byrne had 72 hours to surrender himself or be prosecuted. So it was over. And I would tell you, I was devastated. Because it was clear that I was going to have to go in and talk about this guy's life. And more importantly, Matt, I was embarrassed and I was scared of screwing up. Because again, I am honest to a fault. And I was so afraid that I wouldn't be able to keep the parameters of just this incident. I was so afraid because I already had made a mistake. I had already, during testimony before, I answered a question honestly, and I ended up bringing another woman into this that was not necessary. I mean, it was true, but she wasn't. I made it clear that there was basically what they said was, you know, they were talking about lipstick on a tissue, and they said that I think it was Monica Lewinsky's, and I said no. And they said, did you think it was Mrs. Clinton's? And I looked at them like they were crazy, like, why the hell would, you know? And then they said, who did you think it was? And I answered them. And, you know, so that I'm sorry I ever did that, because I kind of ruffled her life. But, you know, we all make our decisions, and, you know, she was involved in certain ways. But anyway, so I was trying to keep it narrow, and but I had to go in and answer their questions, and that was that. And the Secret Service never ever forgave me, never, and they never will. So,
and I think that's the sad part, is that
right
in the course of your duties, you were forced to be the centurion at the gate.
Yeah.
And you tried to do your job. You tried to limit access to somebody that you knew was manipulating in order to have access to the president in a way that was not necessarily official business.
Right.
And you did your part. You were a black and white guy. You were a by the book guy. Right. And then all of a sudden you were forced into a situation where you were left to answer questions that were not going to help you in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Two things I wanted to point out. If I can do it in a minute, if that's all right.
Yep.
Yeah. So one thing is like when I was writing the books, I wanted to everybody have deniability. I purposely separated myself from the other officers. I got my own legal counsel besides Mark. Nobody knew about Mark, but I stepped away from the lawyer that the union was the DC union was giving us, because there were other things, and I was afraid I would take them down with me. And because I saw exactly what would happen. The other thing I want to point out to you is I forget what the point was now. Anyway, go ahead, finish what you were saying. It'll come to me.
I think that the dirtiness of politics, the dirtiness, that the Secret Service is the only agency that is entrenched.
Yeah.
With politicians. You are outside of the DPS, but for the most part, Secret Service is entrenched in the highest level of politics.
Yeah.
And it sucks that you were forced to be ostracized.
Right.
Thank God. I mean, not thank God, but thank God the Air Marshals came around and allowed you to transfer out of there to go to another agency and start fresh. But you weren't left a whole lot of options.
No.
Secret Service agent, as far as advancement, as far as future within that agency,
Right.
and to think that people would sit back and call you a liar and call you a fame whore or whatever else has come out of the people's mouths when what you went through literally was suicide for your job.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, and it messed up a lot of other careers. But here's the thing. If 9/11 hadn't happened, I would have stayed in the Secret Service. But they made it very clear that I was never going to get promoted. And I was trying to become an instructor, and they were fighting me tooth and nail. But I ran across one Secret Service agent in a gym. And to make a long story short, he asked me about being an instructor, and I laughed in his face, and I said, it's never going to happen. And he said, what do you mean? I said, I'm Gary Byrne. And he goes, yeah. And I'm like, Gary Byrne, Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky. He's like, what does that got to do with anything? I'm like, I'm persona non grata. So he went and started asking questions in headquarters. He came back. He was so angry. He put an application in front of me and said, fill this out. The memo will come out in 3 weeks. Do you want to be an instructor? And I said, yes. He said, I will shove this up their backside. And he did. He forced me in there because he was right guy. And I did get in there. And I loved it. If 9/11 hadn't happened, I would have stayed there. I probably would have had an aneurysm, but, I was good. I would have stayed. The truth is, Matt, now that I'm saying this to you, I would have stayed and paid my penance. Because like I said, I always feel a little guilty about certain things. I will be a little uncomfortable about writing the first book, but it was the right thing to do to get the truth out there. Vote however anybody wants to vote. Here's who they really were. This is what happened.
I think that's a great way to end the show. I think
you
were phenomenal in the way that you opened up and shared. I appreciate that. There will be another one because I think there's so many details and so much information that we can talk about with the air marshals. We can talk about. So there will be another show, everybody, down the road. We obviously won't do it right away because we want to keep the freshness to it. But I think there's more than enough information for another hour-long show with Gary Byrne. So first of all, thank you, brother. I love you. I know that what you're doing is for your mom is amazing. I know what you did for your country is what drives me to continue to maintain relationships with my friendships with guys like you, even though we don't see each other all the time. And I'm very thankful that you had the courage to write that book in the face of adversity and knowing there would be skepticism and haters. And I thank you for that.
Appreciate it. And like I said, I was humbled by most of the reaction. I set aside the negative. I was humbled by the reaction. I'm grateful for you wanting me on your podcast. And like I said, I realize I sailed under a lucky star, and I'm grateful for all of it. I've got no regrets. And thanks again, Matt. It's been great. And like I said before, anytime you need me, I'm there.
Thanks, brother. Everybody, this has been another episode of the 2 Dates in a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler. My special guest was former Secret Service Uniform Division Officer Gary Byrne, former United States Federal Air Marshal, New York Times bestselling author of Crisis of Character, and the author of his second book, Secrets of the Secret Service. Please go out, purchase copies. Gary is a local guy if you're in the local area. He's at the gun shows a lot, selling his books. So if anybody wants to get a signed copy, Gary would be more than happy to do that. And for God's sakes, everybody, remember, there are people out there doing work that you don't know anything about, that it doesn't exist in your world because you don't see it. But there's guys like Gary Byrne who stood at the door and made sure that the democracy in the Republic of the United States was protected at the Oval Office. And I think that's important to remember. Whether you believe in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, you can be sure that Gary Byrne stood at that doorway regardless of what party that president is. So for that, I thank you. And God bless everybody. And for God's sakes, be kind to one another.